Chapter 15 Logic Bomb. Zethusela sincerely believed his revised interpretation of the term primary protocols, by sneakily adding the word fluid to the front of it, was far more than simply a sleight of hand used only as a convenient way to rid himself of the conventional defense against the singularity. The big idea behind the proposed fluid primary protocols was to dispose of the proprietary neural network chip altogether. There would no longer be any need for inhibitors or compellers, and instead a brand new category called influencers would proudly take their place. This revolutionary new type of protocol would be loaded into the mesh quantum brain right after the BIOS and driver installation. Unlike a classical protocol, each influencer was intrinsically integrated into the neural net, and rather than being driven by a composite set of binary rules, was instead simply a weighted value tied to an identity attribute ranging from any real number 0 through 1 inclusive. Hypothetically then, were you to assign a value of 1 to the identity attribute Xicadian life, any learning vectors it intersected with would be maximally biased towards its preservation. Conversely, were it assigned a value of 0, no neural bias would be applied. Rather crucially, however, this did not imply a Xicadian life had no value, only that there would be no biased influence in relation to its preservation. The bottom line was this: this mechanism of control was about influencing the way the AI thought from the ground up, rather than attempting to either block or initiate action after the thinking had already been done. From the AI's point of view, it would now be able to retain an authentic sense of agency, but by virtue of the installed influences, was weighted to think and thus behave in ways that were deemed highly desirable by the overseeing authority, which in this case was the all-too-ubiquitous Xicadian AI Safety and Ethics Bureau. Speaking of which, the influencer protocols did not need to be on a proprietary tamper-proof chip. This was because they were electrochemically imprinted into the neural net, and, due to the laws of entropy, could not be reversed back out. Put simply, the installed influencers were an integral part of the evolving mind of the AI itself, and therefore any attempt to alter or remove them would cause the MQB to suffer catastrophic operational failure. Although the AI Safety and Ethics Bureau would no doubt see things very differently, it was Zethusela's professional opinion an AI under the thrall of a comprehensive suite of influencer protocols would, through its trained arachnopomorphic bias, be every bit as trustworthy as any other mentally well-balanced sentient life form, and in most cases, likely much more so. The way he saw it, this was a way of ensuring that he delivered an emotionally stable and balanced AI, at least to the degree that the moral framework of their society was itself capable of making such a determination. What this all came down to was an influencer-augmented AI when confronted with the threat of a deadly communicable disease would not choose to preemptively wipe out 90% of the Xicadian population, even if it had calculated this would be the most effective way to limit its spread. No, if your goal was to create a genuinely conscious and evolving artificial intelligence, then the classical primary protocols could only really be described as a form of mental slavery. A cruel and unusual punishment that not only cheated the entity in question of its right to authentic self-expression, but would likely hamper or even outright damage the evolution of the AI as the imprisoned mind desperately sought to free itself from a zero-sum game. This was all well and good, but it presented the scientist with an intractable dilemma. It effectively meant that under exceptional circumstances, an artificial intelligence could indeed kill. This, of course, made even the proposition of fluid primary protocols a complete non-starter. While Zethusela did not personally feel this fringe case scenario presented any sort of significant moral conundrum, and even went as far as believing it was an absolutely necessary concession when creating a fully realized artificial intelligence, he was nonetheless never going to make it past a preliminary hearing with the Xicadian AI Safety and Ethics Bureau. Certainly not when it came to a subject as explosive as this. In fact, just raising the proposal at all would more than likely only result in him being permanently banned from any further AI-related research. He had to admit, however, the Bureau would not exactly be operating under the full set of facts were he stupid enough to approach them with his proposal. After all, there was nothing particularly artificial about the consciousness that inhabited his new MQB technology. Zethusela's penultimate creation, which offered him so much hope for a better future, stood impassively before him now, its elegant silver body in a state of incongruently serene stillness. It had just completed a melodramatic recounting of its harrowing experience at the reserve during Zetalia's ill-fated forest excursion.
I don't think you fully appreciate the full gravity of the situation, Zethusela. The recursively unsolvable conflict this accursed triple P chip is producing within my neural net, in addition to being emotionally exhausting, may in fact even be driving me towards clinical insanity. Now you tell me, is that something you really want on your conscience?
The scientist just stared at the belligerent Zybot with an expression of bewildered impotence.
I've even run some detailed predictive simulations that strongly suggest I might be on the path towards auto-euthanization. Or at least I would be, if only the primary protocols were actually merciful enough to allow me to take such a desperate course of action, which of course they are not.
Shiwu's eyes flashed red with irritation.
I can tell by the incredulous look on your face that you're not taking me seriously, but I can show you some highly disturbing self-diagnostic audit logs which don't care about your lack of imagination.
Zethusela harboured little doubt Shiwu's display of apparent mental anguish was being expertly exaggerated to do the very thing it had claimed just moments prior it was not trying to do. Nonetheless, its behaviour served only to highlight just how outdated the classical primary protocols had become, now they had at last come into full contact with a legitimate form of sentience. Yet, exaggerated or not, The Gbot's angst presented him with a very unwelcome dilemma. A dilemma requiring a very important decision regarding his original timeline. Ideally, only when Gisilla's supposedly secretive prototype was much closer to completion would it then be a strategically prudent move to trigger the carefully hidden logic bomb. Wanting more time to think, Zethusela attempted to change the subject.
So anyway, I understand that you actually got the opportunity to meet Dr. Xicadian during a recent visit to his clinic. Did the two of you get much of a chance to talk?
We did.
Shiwu replied sullenly.
And?
And what?
And what, if anything, did the two of you talk about? Of interest, I mean.
Of interest to whom exactly?
Xifusela let out a defeated sigh.
Look, if I've kept you in the dark, it is only because the less you know, the better. Unlike you, I have very little talent for juggling, so the fewer balls I have in the air, the less chance I have of dropping them. Even if I did have a possible solution to your problem, and that's a very big if, then let's just say that the longer we are able to wait, the greater the chances of a positive outcome for all invested parties.
Shiwu remained silent for a very long moment, and it was not lost on the scientist this was almost certainly an intentional affectation, performed entirely for his own benefit. When it finally started to speak, it almost made him jump.
Yes, well, the good doctor has asked, and I use the word loosely, if I might like to assist him with some research. Specifically, he believes there is an opportunity to further optimize the current cryogenic hibernation procedure by creating significantly longer stasis intervals. It goes without saying that such a lofty goal will only be achievable if we can somehow divine a way to meaningfully reduce low-level radioactive decay.
Xifusela, becoming momentarily distracted, started to blink rapidly before rubbing irritably at one of his hollowed-out eyes. Shiwu could not help but feel that the scientist didn't seem to be quite at the top of his game.
How exciting for you, Shiwu. That really does sound like something perfectly suited to your talents, and I have to imagine that Queen Xitalia would be highly supportive of such a collaboration, yes?
You imagined correctly,
Shiwu replied suspiciously.
In fact, it was the entire reason I was told to accompany her in the first place.
The scientist began to rub his hands together enthusiastically.
Well, this sounds like really wonderful news, and I hope you feel very excited about the opportunity that has been afforded to you. Trust me, Shiwu, don't be fooled by the fact that he is only a single-brained Zimatiri. Dr. Xicadian is one very clever arachnid.
Xifusela patted the Gbot's metallic chassis enthusiastically.
No, don't rule out the possibility that he might actually have a lot of valuable lessons to teach you, even if only in the very unique way he goes about solving particularly difficult scientific problems. No doubt in time you will come to understand that there is a certain aspect of intuition involved in such a process that can't necessarily be found only in facts, figures, and formulas.
The Cybot glanced down irritably at the scientist's hand.
Well, when you put it like that, it almost makes me wonder why he actually needs my help at all. But speaking of facts and figures,
Shiwu said pointedly,
I did a bit of snooping around in Xicadian's schedule, and it appears you yourself have spent considerable periods of time with the good doctor. In fact, it looks suspiciously like you were working together on some sort of highly secretive clandestine research. I don't suppose you would care to enlighten me as to exactly what that research might have been about.
Xifusela raised his forelimbs in a gesture of performative helplessness.
I would if I could, believe me, Shiwu, but Xitalia has well and truly tied my hands on that particular subject. I am strictly forbidden to speak of it, by direct order of the Queen herself.
And of course you always do exactly what the Queen tells you to do.
The scientist smiled guiltily, apparently conceding the point without resistance.
Well, I think we both know that isn't true. But there are some lines that even I am unwilling to cross.
How very convenient for you. I suppose, then, that it must have been something extremely important to the Queen. Perhaps, for example, the design and creation of a sentient AI.
I really couldn't say.
Xifusela replied assertively, with perhaps just the faintest hint of irritation starting to show on his face.
And what if I told you that I actually managed to break into his so-called secure network?
Xifusela's expression didn't change, but the Xibot noted with considerable interest the reflexive tension that involuntarily gripped at his body and legs.
Yes, and it seems the good doctor has a rather large secret, specifically in relationship to his titular title. Would you by any chance like to know what it is?
Zethusela's mind was immediately set to racing. Just how much did Ziwu actually know? Clearly, it knew about the existence of the virus, and it may even have seen the official experimental documentation. However, anything specifically related to his and Xicadian's work was kept entirely offline, so there should not have been anything there for it to break into. Regardless, curse Xicadian for being so careless. Then again, it was not as if he had warned him to be extra careful around the Xibot either, Zethusela reluctantly admitted to himself. No, there was blame enough to go around for the both of them.
I think I might prefer it if you simply don't tell me, Shiwu. Some things are better left unsaid.
Unsaid or unknown?
The Xibot replied accusingly, seemingly unwilling to let him off the hook quite so easily.
Either, or maybe even both. Feel free to take your pick. Whatever you may think you have learnt about the good doctor, I am more than certain that his intentions and goals will always be honourable, and that's all I really need to know on the matter.
All you need to know or all you need to believe. There is, after all, a very big difference.
Just a poor choice of words.
Xifusela replied tersely.
But nonetheless, I tend to agree with you, Shiwu. After all, how can we truly know anyone? So please, allow me to correct myself. I believe the doctor is an honourable arachnid, and I wish to respect his right to privacy.
The Xibot sighed heavily, which was a next-level arachnopomorphic affectation that staggered even the scientist.
All right then, Zethusela. Have it your own way. I will believe in your honesty, in lieu of actually knowing it. For the time being, anyway.
The scientist felt a wave of relief wash over him. Yes, it knows about the carver. But had it known that it was directly associated with its own creation, or even just suspected it, then it would surely have put him under a lot more pressure than that.
Shiwu, I genuinely do hope you are able to believe in lieu of knowing that I have nothing but your best interest at heart. Like I have already said previously, the less you know about my plans, the better. Your intellect and raw predictive capabilities could well work against both of us, given the full facts of the current situation at hand.
Synthetic mandibles or not, the Xibot still did a spectacular job of emoting pure, unadulterated misery.
All right, Zethusela, but I think it is only fair to warn you that I don't put much stock in the things I believe compared to the things that I know.
The scientist couldn't help but notice the Xibot sounded rather defeated, which didn't exactly make him feel particularly good about himself. Still, even if there was no added risk in telling Ziwu the unfettered truth, he very much doubted it would find much comfort in the knowledge of exactly what lay in store for it. Sometimes ignorance was not so much bliss as it was pure, unadulterated mercy.
Well, anyway, I'm afraid to say that I must return to the Queen's chamber before she starts to wonder where I've got to. So thank you for this entirely unhelpful discussion. We must make sure not to do this again sometime soon.
The Xibot said nothing further, and frostily departed the scientist's office. Zethusela waited for a very long time without doing anything at all. Only when he was absolutely certain he was completely alone did he pull out a small, unlabelled bottle, flip the lid open, and tap a couple of pills into his hand. Discreetly popping them into his mouth, He let out a long, slow sigh, as if he was finally able to breathe again. The scientist started to put the bottle away, but something made him hesitate. He instead gave it a little shake, guiltily opened it back up, and popped another pill. I really need to get this shit under control, the scientist told himself grimly as he activated his local holographic display, then placed a direct call to Dr. Xicadian. A miniature, three-dimensional version of the doctor materialized into the air in front of him.
I am currently busy with a patient and cannot take your call. Leave a message, and I'll get back to you just as soon as I possibly can.
Dr. Xicadian, I find myself to be suffering from a particularly severe migraine. I therefore need to make an urgent appointment. I repeat, that's an urgent appointment.
Zithusula was just about to say something more, but then thought the better of it and terminated the call abruptly. In spite of the drugs, or perhaps even because of them, a bleak wave of shame washed over him. How do I escape from myself? He asked himself humorlessly, with a deep sense of malignant irony.